Hi everyone, Marcon Code here for a 53rd and brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today, we're going back again to the Zeta era in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video for the 4th year anniversary, we're going to explore the history of the GigaChad Gundam, its mechanical lore, variants, and extract every bit of mechanical knowledge we have on them so far. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Gundam Mark V? Labeled as the ORX-013, the Gundam Mark V, also nicknamed G5, was a prototype quasi-Psychomo mobile suit, commissioned by the Titan Task Force organization in the later stages of the Grips conflict. A machine designed and manufactured by the infamous Augusta Research Institute with support from the Murasame Labs, the Mark V was from the get-go conceptualized as a very ambitious machine, being created to replicate and mass-produce the assets of the Psycho Gundam line, while solving most of their drawbacks. Indeed, while possessing tremendous firepower, excellent battlefield control and all-range capabilities, the Psycho Gundams were restricted in many different ways, suffering from poor mobility due to their 40-meter size, alongside requiring costly Psychomo systems and unstable Cyber-New type pilots to operate, dooming not only any hope of mass production, but of limited production as well. The Gundam Mark V was thus Augusta attempts to try to replicate these assets on a larger scale in a smaller frame, the new entry of the Mark series taking the form of a very particular mobile suit. Although being labeled as a second-generation mobile suit, the Mark V was actually one of the handful mobile suits of its generation, such as the Palasafin, to be closer in design to the newer 4th generation of mobile suits, featuring a 25-meter total height, a mobile armor-grade 5000 kW generator, and a bulky frame coupled with a tremendous firepower. First of all, the Mark V could rely on powerful and versatile inbuilt weapons, a pair of 12 MW rated high-output beam cannons, capable of rotating to fire either from its hips or backwards, and which doubled as detachable hyper beam sabers, granting additional close-range abilities through these large 0.9 MW rated beam blades. To complement these cannons, the Mark V could pick from two different beam rifles to choose from: the standard Augusta series rifle with an adaptive firing selector, or a longer rapid-firing gunner type rifle. Although the most famous unit of the Mark V line would never use any of these rifles, going instead for a different model provided by the faction which acquired it, but more on that later. Last but not least, the Gundam Mark V was also outfitted with a special system it revolutionized rather than pioneered, the infamous device known as the Quasi-Psychomo system. A new system finally stabilized and developed by the Augusta Labs, spawned through a decade of research on countless experimental machines. The Quasi-Psychomo was an old-abuse alternative to the infamous Psychomo system, replacing the Psycho Waste to Electric Waste converter by an Electric Brainwaves enhancer, finally enabling all type pilots to remote control wire-guided assets through their suits alone. Through this Quasi-Psychomo, the Gundam Mark V could thus enable a skilled all-type pilot to mentally puppeteer two new box-shaped weapons called Incoms, each equipped with a 4.5 MW beam gun and fully capable of performing all-range attacks. In comparison to Psychomo controlled regular funnels or bits, the Quasi-Psychomo and Incoms were only able of two-dimensional movement through wire-guided cables, but could still prove to be extremely deadly in the hands of aces, especially those capable of using them as secondary harassing weapons to unleash to press the enemy while actively steering the mobile suits in high-speed combat. Ice on the cake, the Gundam Mark V Quasi-Psychomo system was also the first fully-fledged operational Quasi-Psychomo of its time, with the degree of precision and control it offered over its Incoms completely outshining any prototype version that came before it, such as the one used in the NetX Alpha decade ago, or even its own predecessor, the Gundam Mark IV. Bonus point, the unorthodox structure of the Mark V, based around a drum frame inspired core with blocks grafted on it, also enabled easy repairs and manutention on the Quasi-Psychomo system, an incredible edge over the hyper-complex to caliber and hard to repair Psychomo variants. Now you're probably thinking that these high firepower and remote controlled abilities, while admirable in their own right, were far from matching the expectations set up by the Psycho Gundam line. The Gundam Mach 5 instead introducing another asset in its sleeves to palliate to this issue. Indeed, far from being sluggish as its predecessors of the Psycho Gundam line, the Gundam Mach 5 was actually an extremely agile machine, with its 10 altitude control verniers providing excellent maneuverability and stability, while its two main large thruster units instead pick its mobility to completely new levels, with the Mach 5 featuring not just excellent cruising speed, but also terrifying raw acceleration. This mobility was also enhanced by the Mach 5 titular shield asset, a special shield booster unit which could be grafted on its back to serve as a long-range booster and propellant reserve, coming handy for long-range missions. Now, the Gundam Mach 5 was not exactly a perfect machine, far from that. First of all, the streamlined and polished quasi-Psycho system, with all its merits, remained a complex and hard-to-use asset, the incomes being very difficult to control and more disorientating than anything else for Green New pilots. Secondly, the Mach 5 mobility, while an amazing asset in its own right, was not just a nightmare to steer for regular pilots, but for veteran aces as well. The brutality of the evasive maneuvers enabled by the model and the G-forces counterbalancing happening afterwards being excessive to the point of being detrimental to the pilot, as proved by the Mach 5 mod's infamous user, Bravecoat, who was nearly knocked out during one of said maneuvers and shattered his teeth due to clenching its jaw too much. Thirdly, the Mach 5 was also plagued by its structural and design complexity, which, while way more affordable than any Psycho Gundam, was not cheap enough to even consider limited production, grounding the new model to the prototype state. The Gundam Mach 5 would also suffer from a streak of bad luck during its existing history, being completed too late to be delivered to the Titans who commissioned it, and despite a renewed interest from the Federation forces in the program, most Mach 5 would end up falling in more than questionable hands, aka Neo Zeon and Titan sympathizers known as the New Decides. Nonetheless, the Gundam Mach 5 would prove, during its short history, to be an incredible area dominance machine, completely worthy of its title as a Gundam type, kickstarting a legacy that would last for over 80 years, first through its successor the Dove and Wolf, then Silver Bullet, then under the form of their part, which survived till the age of the Warring Space States. But that's enough setting for today, let's get to our lore. The year is Universal Century UC-87. At the time, the Earth Federation civil war known as the Grips Conflict was in full swing, opposing the Titans Task Force organization to the more reformist splinter branch known as the Anti-Earth Union Group. With most of Earth Federation's political spheres and industrial research grounds firmly in their pockets, the Titans had started a war with heavy tactical advantages over the rebel AUG, the smaller organization being initially forced to rely on ragtag equipment and defection from the regular Federation forces to bolster their numbers, while having to contend with increasingly advanced technological assets pumped by the Titans, be it new type used mobile armors, general-purpose experimental models, or dozens of other transformable assets. This initial high ground held by the Titans, overall maintained until the mid-summer UC-87, however started to fade as the war progressed, with seeds planted as early as the start of the war, such as the theft of the 3 Titans Gundam Mach II by the AUG and subsequent recruitment of the Argamas crew, serving as catalysts that greatly bolstered the AUG's cause. As the war continued with the Titans continuing their demential production of high-tech mobile weapons while getting increasingly isolated from the mainland Federation and seeing their numbers and prestige dwindle, the AUG was instead able to slowly solidify its positions, using the massive support from its sponsor Anami Electronics to cohesively modernize its standard forces, while also acquiring advanced mobile suits such as the Zeta Gundam, Gundam Mach 3s or the Le Cygne for their top rising star pilots to use. This geopolitical situation cemented itself by the end of the summer 87, with the Titans launching a massive military operation known as Operation Apollo, aiming at taking control of the lunar space around Von Braun before trying to drop a colony on Granada, both situations the AUG thwarted and cost the Titans much needed allegiances and support from the lunar cities. On the earthly side of the conflict, things were not looking much more brighter for the Titans, with the AUG weaker Earth-based counterparts, Karaba, being finally able to gain momentum while slowly starting to push back Titans' forces stationed there instead of being continuously on the run. Karaba's growing boldness and multiplied ground offensive eventually forced Titan's High Command to take the issues much more seriously, resulting in a decision to answer to the threat by kickstarting a new mobile suit development plan, the goal being to bring Karaba to its knees through the use of a single tide-turning asset, a Gundam-type machine. For this task, the Augusta Research Institute, a pioneer in new type use technologies and area dominance machines, was thus commissioned to carry on to term such development plan, with the Titans entrusting to Augusta secret plans obtained through extremely shady backroom deals. Such backroom deals were in fact carried over between the Titans and Anem Electronics, with the Luna Mega Corporation, while a sponsor of the opposing AUG, still trading data from one of their most recent mobile suits, the MSF-007 Gundam Mark III, offering it to the Titans in exchange of additional contracts and other juicy gifts. To rewind and ponder a bit about the Gundam Mark III, note that the Titans had initially kickstarted the Mark line of Gundams with the Gundam Mark II, with the original Mark II design engineer, Franklin Bidan, Camille's father, already laying plans for a succeeding Gundam Mark III. After the Grips Noah debacle that resulted in all the Mark IIs being captured by the AUG and frankly being killed in the early hours of the Grips conflict, both the Titans and Anaheim had tried to create their own Gundam Mark III, with the Titans quickly bastardizing Franklin Bidan's early concept with the Gaplans, resulting in the RX 272 line of Gundam Mark IIIs. Meanwhile, Anem Electronics was instead given the lion's share by the AUG, two of the three captured Gundam Mark IIs, which they studied and disassembled to create a more advanced successor of theirs, the eventual proper MSF-007 Gundam Mark III. Anaheim Gundam Mark III wasn't produced in a handful numbers, with some units being sold to the AUG, while at least one of them was instead sold to the Titans. Anaheim shady business practices as usual, but more on that in a future video. In all cases, such backroom deal between Anaheim and the Titans didn't just take the form of shared blueprints from the Gundam Mark III, with the Gundam Mark III own lead engineer, Professor Fujita, being allegedly dispatched to Earth to assist the Augusta Labs in the ordeal, returning as a main designer for this ground area dominance Gundam to use against Karaba. Thus came to be the ORX-012 Gundam Mark IV, also codenamed MSF-008 after Fujita itself, a prototype ground-use mobile suit assembled by Augusta around September UC-87. An experimental mobile suit designed to excel in forced reconnaissance and infiltration of enemy facilities under 1G, the Gundam Mark IV was quite an unorthodox design, widely different from its parent suit the Mark III, be it in both design philosophy and general assets. Adopting a fairly bulky armoring frame and silhouette, the Mark IV was nonetheless a very maneuverable machine, ditching the Mark III's signature wing binders, less than useful under 1G, to instead adopt a set of large binders more in line with the Mark II original design, each coming with additional thrusters and connected to its backpack. These two binders were each equipped with their own signature weapon loadout, with the Mark IV left binder storing a detachable hyperbeam saber, with some sources suggesting this weapon could also double as a high-output beam cannon, while features its successor the Gundam Mark V would eventually retain. On its right shoulder, the Mark IV instead adopted a single income unit, connected to the backpack through a metallic cable and controlled through an early version of the quasi-Psychomu system. Why did Augusta install such a system in the ground special as Mark IV, incomes being less than optimal in 1G, is not exactly clear, with some sources mentioning that around the same time frame, the Augusta Labs were also deeply involved into a different prolonged development project to finally put the quasi-Psychomu to practical use, which could indicate that the Mark IV, while yes commissioned as a ground superiority asset for the Titans, were also treated as an experimental testbed unit by Augusta for the quasi-Psychomu. This feature would have thus been integrated as a way to gauge its current practical application and the degree of completion of the quasi-Psychomu system, before the Gundam Mark IV being completed and shipped off to the Titans for them to deploy against Karaba as intended. Now, wherever the Mark IV was eventually deployed or even fully completed is entirely a mystery, with no sighting of it being ever recorded in the entirety of the Grips or First Neo-Zeon Wars. What is however known is that a slight variation of it, the Gundam Mark IV Werewolf, was indeed completed and shipped off to the Titans around October UC-87, being assigned to the Pegasus-class Hecat, an experimental squadron tasked to test the Gundam. With the Gundam Werewolf manga being incomplete at the time, a lot of information and secrets about the Mark IV Werewolf have yet to be revealed, with the unit keeping a lot of mystery in its sleeves for the time being. In terms of bodily frame, the Werewolf is quite similar to the base Mark IV, differing only through its slightly different shoulder and waist armor and through a more Mark V shaped chin piece, while keeping most of its base weaponry and assets, notably the standard Mark IV beam rifle and shield, as well as the Hyper Beam Saber beam cannon, single income unit, as well as the Quasi-Psychomu system. Despite its Quasi-Psychomu system, the Werewolf is also rumored to include some new type use features and seems to exact some toll on people entering its cockpit, putting them against their own fears and demons, and in contact with an ominous obsession centered around werewolves of the European folklore. From what we have seen so far, it seems that an entire conspiracy is baked behind the werewolf as quote-unquote the Gundam encountered is the Mark IV, or more precisely a prototype based on it. However, the Gundam, the werewolf, is another suit, followed by shots of a different unit and crates of multiple W-type mobile suits in the shadows. What does it mean won't be revealed for a while, but we also know that piloting the werewolf can be made easier through a weird enhancing drug called Garufex, which is even more mysterious. Perhaps the Gundam Mark IV Werewolf is only a decoy frame to hide something in which the totally AUK representative Sir Vukodlak is involved, but let's wait the future chapters for the story to unfold. Now let's go back to the Augusta Labs on Earth. Around the same time the Gundam Mark IV was undergoing developments at the Augusta Research Institute, Titans High Command was already planning major counteroffensive against the AUK, planning to unleash as many tide-turning area dominance machines as possible to finally regain their lost grounds in space. Amongst the most reliable and effective machines in the Titans' possessions was notably their few units of the Psycho Gundam line, a series of 40 meters tall Gundam-shaped new type use mobile armors coming with transformable features and nightmarish firepower and many battlefield control features, thus making them the most feared area dominance machines in the entire war, even when put against much nimbler high-performance mobile suits such as the Zeta series or different lines of new type use mobile armors like the Bandok. These amazing capacities were however diluted in the massive amount of issues the Psycho Gundam suffered from, which, as we said in the intro, ranged from over-reliance on rare, costly, and very unstable cyber new types, exceptionally high manufacturing and manutention costs, alongside overall poor maneuverability. With the Titans only possessing a handful of Psycho Gundams in their arsenal, and with no ways of fixing all these issues at once with a simple variation of the Psycho Gundam, Titans High Command thus came back knocking at the door of the Augusta Labs, commissioning them with the creation of a unit capable of solving as many of those problematic flaws as possible. This kick-started Project G5, with the Augusta Research Institute quickly banding with the Psycho Gundam's original manufacturer, the Murasame Labs, to drastically redesign the Psycho Gundam and its key assets, with the goal being to develop a unit capable of achieving similar levels of area dominance on the battlefield with much less drawbacks, and for a fraction of the cost if possible. Why exactly the Augusta Labs were involved again in such a different project right after being commissioned for the Grand Use Mark IV is not exactly clear, with some sources mentioning that the Augusta Labs Quasi-Psychomu project, which ended up being included in the Mark IV, was well received by Titan's High Command. The idea that Project G5 could phase out Psychomu features for an all-type usable Quasi-Psychomu being quite appealing to them. Alongside the involvement of the Murasame Labs, some sources also mention that much like for the Mark IV or the Gaplant, the G5 project was jointly carried with the help of the Auckland Research Institute, with Mark IV and G5 being possibly both manufactured there before being transferred to Augusta to install the Quasi-Psychomu system, hence the Auckland ORX series number in their codename. In any case, the Augusta, Auckland and the Murasame Labs all went together back to the drawing board, studying and examining the Psycho Gundam and its assets to finally create a brand new area dominance mobile weapon, quickly assembling the infamous new mobile suit known as the ORX-013 Gundam Mark V. To create this new mobile suit, Augusta heavily based their work on their recently completed Gundam Mark IV, while also introducing many new design concepts inherited from their studies of the Psycho Gundam line, as well as implementing a simplified but innovative structural design based on various lessons learned during the Grips conflict. Indeed, the Mark V was fundamentally different from not just previous installments of the Mark series of Gundams, but of any Gundam type at all, relying on a core model similar to a drum frame, which was connected to various block sections for its backpack and limbs, resulting in a compartmentalization of its movable frame, enabling it to easily miniaturize in a mobile suit size many mobile armor grade features, such as the finally completed quasi-Psychomu system, as well as improving overall repairability and drastically reducing production costs. Because of this, the early result of Project G5 was not, despite being partially based on the Mark IV and in emulation of the Psycho Gundams, a Gundam on the fundamental level, with the Mark V only receiving its Gundam name and signature Within, mostly for political reasons, the Federation renewing its bad habit of labeling any of its high-performance suits as Gundams at the time of its development. By mid-November USC 87, as Project G5 was still far from completion, things drastically changed in the geopolitical context of the Grips War, with the AUG interrupting the Federation assembly in Dakar as they voted for pro-Titans bills, with its leader Quattro Bagina revealing himself to the world as Casval Rimdaiku, before passionately denouncing the Titans' various atrocities and war crimes committed during the Grips War, retransmitting the broadcast for the entire Earthsphere to see. This speech, supported by the Titans attempting to stop the broadcast by any means necessary, no matter the brutality, resulted in the Federation withdrawing most of its support to the Titans, finally leaning more toward the AUG, forcing the Sprint Task Force to regroup in outer space, hoping to later squash the AUG with a new offensive, to then later coerce back the Federation to return its support. With the Titans losing massive influence and being forced to leave Earth in shame, all their development plans and production line stations there were definitely lost to them, with many of them being closed and many projects being cancelled or instead being transferred over to the standard Federation forces, such as the Barzam assembling line that the Federation later acquired after Karabah's victory against the Titans-controlled New Guinea base. Amongst the few projects that the Federation took over from Titan's control was notably the infamous Project G5, with the Augusta Labs being allowed to carry on the development of the Gundam Mark V, but for the regular Federation forces instead. When was the Gundam Mark V eventually completed is not exactly clear, but Sentinel timeline seems to indicate that the model was eventually finalized around December UC 87 or January UC 88. At the latest in February UC 88, due to what we know of its later deployment history. As part of their diverted contract with the Federation forces, we know that the Augusta Labs eventually rolled out a total of 3 Gundam Mark V, one which fate is known in details, one which is less famous, and one unaccounted for. Now, before I start detailing the history of the 3 known Gundam Mark V, I propose a pause because I just want to clear a common misconception many in the Western fanbase have, notably about this Amuro Ray custom Mark V, or nonsense about the Mark V being possibly developed for Amuro, about one of the Mark V being developed for Amuro, or even about Amuro Ray ever getting one of such models. The wiki claims about such an Amuro Ray custom Mark V is thus entirely fabricated stuff, and it either a genuine but bumbling misconception at best, what worse intentional misinformation, with whoever wrote the article even daring to put a source quote that I found and read, and it goes against such claim. But let me deconstruct the entire case. See, at the time Double Zeta Gundam was in production, around 1986, the Sunrise team and the various mechanical designers involved toyed with a lot of possible concepts, some of which were retained for the series, some retained but heavily changed, while others were instead simply dropped, such as the Gym Plus and the Rig Gym that fused into the Gym 3 later, or this fantastic Gaza Mariner. Now, this Gaza M-Type, Gaza Mariner, is where things get interesting, as it is a prime example of what we are trying to convey now. It was planned to be the escort of the Capul in the Double Zeta series and a marine version of the Gaza COD, but was eventually dropped for the Zaku Mariner when it was decided that Axis would descend on Earth with their battleships. Later on, Advance of Zeta introduced a Gaza M-Type, the Marine type, that reused the concept of the Gaza Mariner, but this doesn't mean that the Gaza Mariner ever existed in the Universal Century, nor that it is a variation of the Gaza M-Type or even a custom version. All of you, keep that example in mind. During this concept stage for Double Zeta, one of the concept mechs proposed by Mika Akitaka was this, a large new type use, not quasi new type use mind you, mobile suit known as the G5. Now, the G5 was just that, a concept with Akitaka's small backstory for it, being that it was a Titan's mobile suit that Karoba recovered and then assigned to Amuro Ray. The G5 didn't pass the concept stage, and thus the entire idea was scrapped and never made it to Double Zeta, with the G5 original head being partially salvaged for the Queen Manta design, while the body instead was reused for the Dovenwolf. When Gundam Sentinel aired around 1987, Akitaka, who was very fond of his G5 design, decided to recover it from the trash can, re-implementing it properly in the Universal Century as the new Gundam Mach 5, a quasi-Psychomu mobile suit meant for all types, changing the head to its iconic Gigachad face to make it more antagonist-like. The Double Zeta G5 is the original concept art behind the Mach 5, not a custom unit or a predecessor in any form. Now, where the misconception really started was that between Double Zeta and Sentinel happened the magazine Gundam Wars 2 Mission Double Zeta, published by Dainippon Kaiga. In this magazine, a polished version of the original G5 was presented and used as an in-law predecessor to the Dovenwolf, a Titan's machine inspired by the Psycho Gundam that was transferred to Neo Zeon. To sum things up, the concept G5 was indeed sought out lore as a machine for Amuro's use, but had never passed the concept stage, and then Sentinel finally re-implemented the design properly with a new backstory far away from the original G5. The Mach 5 with a more Gundamish head was indeed used in Gundam Wars 2 Mission Double Zeta, which relevance is questionable after Sentinel new mechanical lore, but even there it was only said to be a machine that Neo Zeon acquired, which means that even if such machine existed in the lore, it would have not been Amuro Ray custom unit, it would have been the Mach 5 that fell to Neo Zeon. Sure, one could try to whine that perhaps Amuro had a Mach 5 and that Neo Zeon captured that same unit later, but that's more dishonest mental gymnastics than thoughtful speculations. So no, Amuro Ray never used a Mach 5 or was intended to use one anywhere aside Akitaka's original concept for the G5, not even for the Mach 5. And to finalize this rant, yeah, no, the original G5 specs were different from the later Mach 5. Its Hyper Beam Saber doesn't seem to double as cannons, it had head-mounted Vulcans, different generator outputs, so no idea why someone would try to claim that. But let's go back to the proper Mach 5 in lore deployment history. The first of the Mach 5 triplets, Unit 1, was initially painted in federal greyish and whitish colors, being assigned to the Earth Federation Space Forces while being equipped with the Augusta series beam rifle. From what Sentinel states, this Mach 5 was actually supposed to be deployed during the battle for the Colony Laser that closed the Grips conflict, albeit it is unclear if it would have been sent to fight on the behalf of the Earth Federation Space Forces or the Titan side. Unfortunately, the unit was instead withdrawn and kept in storage at the Penta's Low Orbit Space Station, being later referred as the G equipment by the Federation Forces top brass. Things would however change by the start of the event of Gundam Sentinel around January UC-88, where a group of officers from the Pezun Instructor Corps, outraged by the Federation's renewed decision to back the Ayuk, launched a takeover of the Pezun asteroid base, seizing the facilities and eliminating the elements of the garrison that refused to follow. This kick-started the Pezun Rebellion, with the Federation launching a timid operation to force the newly branded New Decides to back down, thus assembling Task Force Alpha, a unit full of experimental prototypes, novice pilots or washouts, and other paper tigers. Task Force Alpha would however not intimidate the Wemo season New Decides, leading to a costly attack operation on Pezun and the New Decides abandoning the base after detonating it with nuclear charges. With the New Decides relocating on the moon and barricading themselves in Ayer City, the Federation forces would decide to take the situation more seriously, reinforcing Task Force Alpha with additional supplies and replacement suits, while also sending them the G equipment from Penta, the first Gundam Mach 5. In a turn of fate, the courier fleet that was meant to reinforce Task Force Alpha, led by prestigious Federal Admiral Brian Eno, instead became sympathetic to the New Decide's cause, and following a successful approach of Eno by the New Decides, the entire fleet would defect to the Titan sympathizers, bringing them the G equipment as a gift to enter their good graces. Now in the hands of the New Decides, the Gundam Mark V would quickly be assigned to their top ace pilot, a man known as Brave Code, with the New Decides using the Gundam as a symbol to rely behind to not feel the guilt of being anti-Federation, as well as using it as their new prized tactical asset for the fight ahead. First and foremost, the Mark V Unit 1 was repainted in the Titan's traditional dark blue colors, while seemingly ditching the original Augusta series beam rifle, adopting instead the most famous rifle variant the Mark V would often be depicted with. Now, while the beam rifle used by the Mark V when in the New Decide hands is said to not have been its original intended rifle, the similarities between it and the Mark IV beam rifle are quite uncanny and hard to ignore, which would suggest that such a beam rifle was a leftover from Penta the New Decides eventually got, or just a similar rifle that they found to replace the Augusta series beam rifle. In the skilled hands of Brave Code, the Gundam Mark V would prove to be a terrifying enemy for Task Force Alpha to contend, with the Mark V and Code leading the offensive numerous times against the Suppression Corps, butchering in a matter of minutes 3 full squadrons of Neros and the 3 fast units of Task Force Alpha, before easily evading their top unit, the S Gundam, while performing lunar descent, all of that during its very first sortie. Despite this incredible show of force, the Gundam Mark V however still sustained damage during all the combats, which over time led to its income system being fragilized and reducing its combat efficiency. To palliate to this issue, the militia of Ayer City, the lunar city the New Decides had taken refuge into, came up with a field modification for the Gundam Mark V, equipping it with a pair of custom double 3-tubes micro-missile pods mounted on its shoulders. These missile pods, fully portable once emptied and filled with special projectiles, were designed to explode seconds after being fired, scattering shrapnel to cause widespread damage, thus being fully capable of decently damaging mobile suits or just shoot down enemy incomes or missiles. With this equipment, the Mark V's battlefield potential was slightly restored, giving it a secondary weapon to use and avoid overusing the damage incomes too much, as well as increasing its bombardment capabilities. In this configuration, Brave Code and the Gundam Mark V would however soon march to their doom, with the pair finally engaging the XS Gundam over the moon, resulting in a heated duel between the more advanced S Gundam paired with the less skilled Ryu routes, and the less advanced Mark V paired with the way more experienced Brave Code. The Mark V technological might, combined with Code skills, would quickly make short work of routes and the various gimmicks of the superior Gundam, quickly gaining the upper hand, with Ryu only surviving through brief activation of the S Gundam sealed AI, Alice momentarily taking control of the entire suit to save him from his blunders and lack of skill. The Mark V would then finally corner the XS in close-range combat, nearly destroying it before Alice would suddenly reawaken to fully take control of the XS Gundam, the sudden change in combat style providing a surprise effect that Alice used to outmaneuver Code on the Mark V before piercing its cockpit. Alice would then return to her slumber, leaving Ryu stunned, and the Mark V to finally explode, securing the XS underserved victory. Aside Unit 1, it is known that 2 other Mark Vs were also produced by the Augusta Research Institute, with both of them, while far less fleshed out than Unit 1, going in diametrically different directions. Unit 2 remains a total mystery to this day, being completely unaccounted for and never really being mentioned in any modern sources at the time of this video. Some Japanese forums have long theorized that the second missing in action unit likely remained in the hands of the Federation forces, never being deployed and remaining, like Unit 1 was on Sin Penta, in some top secret facility. Another speculation I have heard, which I like to adhere, is that the Black Earth Federation Space Forces color skin for the Mark V, introduced in the original Gundam Mobile Operation game, would have been the different paint scheme for such a Unit 2. Which fall in line with a lot of Gundam models having their first or second unit in darker colors. Other than that, not much else is known or is even discussed about. The last of the triplets, the Gundam Mark V Unit 3, is instead a bit more fleshed out, with the unit being said to have been transferred from Augusta to the Murasame Labs in the very later stages of the Grips conflict. Following the fall of the Titans, Augusta Lab researcher Lauren Nakamoto, an ex-member of Zion's Flanagan Institute during the One-Year War, finally decided to switch over his allegiances, defecting to Axis Zion to become part of their new type research program. Alongside his defection, Loren Nakamoto was also able to pull a few strings in the Murasame Labs, which had been a member before switching to Augusta, with the last remaining Gundam Mark V unit stationed there being transferred to Neo Zeon thanks to his interference. Now, if some of you have good memory, Loren Nakamoto was a character already introduced in Zeta Gundam, being the supervisor of both Cyber New Types Gate Kappa and Rosamia Bandam, being assigned to the Dogose Gear alongside the new Bondok units to monitor their progress. Now, something extremely funny is that Nakamoto was on board the Dogose Gear mere moments before it was sunk by the Pallas Affine, but Nakamoto apparently survived, with some versions having him escape the ship with a shuttle, while other claims Axis rescued him from the wreck of the Dogose Gear. In any case, Loren Nakamoto then later resurfaced to organize the transfer of the Suit Mark V, before re-involving himself with Neo Zeon new type projects, being seen again in Gundam Engage and later on in the timeline during the events of Gundam Walpurgis. Down the line, this transfer Mark V, alongside the retrieved wreck of the Psycho Gundam Mark II, would then be eventually used by Neo Zeon to kickstart a new development plan, with Nakamoto continuing cooperation on it, eventually leading to the creation of a high-performance quasi-Psychomu limited production unit sharing many characteristics with its parent suit the Mark V, the AMX-014 Dovenwolf. Because of time constraints, the sheer amount of lore and variants involved, and to avoid over-bloating this already very long video, we will keep the Dovenwolf for a future video, but just know that the Dovenwolf was eventually able to outshine its main competitor, the Zaku 3, and would, according to Moon Gundam and other sources, be chosen as Neo Zeon's new mainstay model. Although the Dovenwolf production was cut down to only half dozen units thanks to the first Neo Zeon war ending with a Neo Zeon defeat, it would still remain one of the most terrifying mass production models to ever roam the UC-90s, a testament to the Mark V's successful legacy. To finish this video, note that a slight variant of the Mark V, the ORX-013S Gundam Mark V, sometimes nicknamed Augusta Unit Test Colors, was also seemingly created at some point in UC-87, UC-88, although no existing lore has been established for it due to only appearing on the front page of Cyber Comics number 7. This unit, while similar to the regular Mark V, has its share of differences, boasting a white and blue different paint scheme, a lighter armor frame with a more Gundam-esque chest, alongside of course a slightly different arsenal. In terms of inbuilt weapons, the ORX-013S retains the use of the back-mounted Hyperbeam Saber beam cannon dual weapons, alongside the standard 2 income units, although this new Mark V also makes use of an additional pair of different income box units mounted near its neck, alongside an additional back-mounted propellant tank. In terms of handled weapons, the Augusta Test Colors also ditched the standard Mark V loadout, replacing the shield booster for a cut standard shield and the beam rifle for a different rifle type weapon, which, while probably some kind of beam rifle, also features a very suspicious magazine, which various forums I've come across claiming it could be a physical machine gun instead of being a very weird ECAPS. In terms of deployment history, the ORX-013S is a real void, the details behind its existence, production or even pilot being totally unknown, although it can be hypothesized that the girl in a matching normal suit seen in the front page is its intended pilot and very likely a Cyber new type considering the weird headpiece she's equipped with. A personal theory of mine is that the ORX-013S is likely only an advanced testbed unit meant to stress test the income system, hence why it packs 4 instead of just 2, but let's not lose ourselves in speculations. And with this video finally comes to an end. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Marco and Code out.
But who will survive?